Take rubs his eyes as he leans back in the chair. "We should have found that damned gate by now," he says, scanning the desk covered with maps, scrolls, books, and datapads once again for something, anything he may have missed. He stands to make his way to one of the many bookcases, and mid-step he stumbles. The ship has suddenly slowed down. "Mackie, is there a problem?" he queries the ship's AI. The lights dim and go back to full. "Mackie, report," Take commands. And with that, the observation window for the front of the ship slowly opens to a massive structure. A ring made of what looks like rocky black glass. Within that ring, nothing. Pure, inky darkness. "This has to be it," Take exclaimed, hands clasped behind his back as he examined the object outside the window. The ship is suddenly rocked as if by a gigantic wave, a wave that was accompanied by a sound, a horrible, dark bellow stretching out into space. Something pushes against the darkness within the gate, a fragile curtain keeping a nightmare at bay. And the lights go out on the ship. Hello, and welcome to the Bad Spot, an actual play podcast where I, Matt Risby, and I alone am playing through Ironsworn Starforged. This week's Tale from the Drift was from the most excellent Raymond Crocker, who has done a great job of bringing a bit of Lovecraftian horror to this week's flash fiction. Raymond has a blog called Ironsworn, where he is using the Ironsworn rule set to play a solo Legend of the Five Rings campaign, and if you check that out, some of the characters or their namesakes from this week's Tale from the Drift might be familiar. I'll leave a link to Raymond's blog in the description below if you want to check that out, and I thoroughly recommend that you do. Now, if you want to roll some dice and write something for me to read at the beginning of a future episode, then the submission guidelines and contact details are on screen now. And whilst I have you, why don't you leave a like, subscribe, and click the little bell icon so you can follow along the campaign each and every week. Last week, Archer finally reaches the pass in the mountains, only to be incapacitated by a mysterious group of strangers. After sleeping off the effects of a powerful paralyzing agent, he awakes refreshed to face the group's leader, a young man named Cole Petrov, who reveals that he and his fellow shipmates have been stranded here for 2 years. Cole and his crew are peacekeeping troops who were on a humanitarian mission before being pulled through the gate accidentally whilst responding to a distress call. When they crashed on this planet, their shuttle, the rockhopper that Archer discovered, was badly damaged. As they attempted to fix it, half the crew were killed in an attack by the Arc Dragon. The survivors retreated to the mountains, where they have been ever since, waiting for someone else to come through the gate. Archer tells Cole of his rather unconventional arrival and that he did not come through the gate on a ship, so is unable to offer them a viable way to leave the planet. However, Archer does reveal that he is able to activate and to a degree navigate the Iron Gate network, and if they can just figure out a way to get to the gate, there's a chance they can use it. As Cole reminds Archer that they have next to no resources, Archer begins to hatch a plan, involving somehow harnessing the immense energy of the Arc Dragons, a huge number of which populate the valley at nightfall. Meanwhile, Luna watches helplessly on as the Eclipse is pulled slowly towards the Soulbinder's floating fortress. However, shortly before they reach the ship, along with every other vessel left hanging in space, their course is changed, and they find themselves being pulled back towards Sepulchre, which seems to have had its power restored. As they are drawn towards the second hangar, the conduit tells Luna that they are in real trouble, as a pinky yellow glow appears in her eyes. Luna is shoved to the hangar bay floor by 2 Bannersworn, and the swift jab of a rifle stock in her back encourages her to stay down. A procession of prisoners from the upper levels are being escorted in at gunpoint and slowly join the lines of captives on their knees in the hangar bay. Clan Thorn has managed to restore order, their numbers now bolstered by the Soulbinders. Luna looks along the lines of her fellow captives. Many have their heads bowed and kneel quietly, still, almost in a penitent pose. Without exception, those in this pose have the pinky yellow glow in their eyes. Luna quickly works out that maybe half the captives are like this, including the conduit who is kneeling next to her, still, almost at peace. The Eclipse is the only ship in the hangar that isn't a Soulbinder landing craft, or the needle-like fast pursuit escort ships. She counts 2 landing craft and 6 escorts, all slender, pristine gold vessels, the likes of which are still a baffling sight to her. Standing in 2 similarly pristine ranks are 24 of the Soulbinders' Vanguard. Their armour is as ornate as the ships they arrived in, with ribbed, copper-coloured armour plates worn over heavy, brown robes. Each wears a slim, narrow helmet that's crested by 2 rows of short spikes, with just a slit to see out of. Each of the Vanguard has a short dagger in a scabbard at their belt and hold an unusual-looking rifle, smooth and silver, with a drum-like body that tapers to a sharp point at the end of the barrel. They look incongruous in these surroundings, almost as if they've wandered into this place from another time period entirely. But that is nothing compared to the Soulbinders themselves. There are, by Luna's count, 8 Soulbinders in the hangar, each dressed in much the same fashion, with several layers of almost improbably clean purple and white robes under glistening plates of glassy black obsidian armour. A heavy chestplate on each of them features an array of dials and vials filled with various liquids that appear to be running through tubes into various parts of their bodies between the plates and under the robes. Completing this strange look is a clear, glass, domed helmet. The suit covers each Soulbinder to just above the nose, meaning only their eyes and the tops of their heads are visible. And they all look the same, withered, pallid, liver-spotted white flesh, with strands of hair clinging to the scalp. Their cold, grey eyes slowly take in what is in front of them, scanning the room deliberately. But even that isn't the most unusual thing about this scene. For each of the Soulbinders, there is another figure. They are dressed simply, in pale blue robes and dark, slate-grey armour, covering their chests and shoulders. Unlike the Soulbinders, each of these figures are young, no older than late teens, Luna thinks. Their heads are shorn, to reveal a disturbing detail. Each of these figures has varying amounts of what appears to be black iron embedded in their flesh. It varies from figure to figure. One has just a single piece above their left eye. Another has a complex web of metal covering nearly their whole head. These figures are the Soulbinders' shadows, and without exception, their eyes and hands glow with the same pinky yellow energy that is keeping most of the captives on their knees. As the Soulbinders walk slowly through the hangar, their shadows follow closely behind, matching them step for step, their faces eerily blank, expressionless. Luna watches as Azriel Vega kneels in deference before who appears to be, from the extra detail on their robes and armour, the leader of the Soulbinders. They reach down and place a gloved hand on Vega's head. After an exchange that Luna can't hear or make out, Vega stands again and bows briefly before walking before the line of prisoners. The Soulbinder follows, their shadow never more than a few paces behind. He stops in front of Luna, and then there's some sort of strange noise, like a metallic gurgle that comes from the Soulbinder. Vega seems to understand and answers whatever it was. He says, "No, I regret to inform you that he has eluded us." And then there's another short, mechanical series of clicks. Vega drops to a stoop in front of Luna and says, "But we do have the next best thing." Okay, so it is the next morning. down on Electric Lizard Land. And I think that what I want to do first, before getting into whatever stupid plan Archer has, is establish a little bit what the survivors' settlement is like. And I think to do that, I think we can work backwards from what we already established, and then maybe use some of the oracles to fill in any blanks that we've been left with. So what do we know? We know that Cole Petrov and his crew have been up here for more than 2 years, and that the Stone Guardians are watchtowers with central heating. So the ancient civilization that built these, they left some degree of comfort, if that's the right word. And what I mean by that is these folks have been able to exist up here comfortably for that time, for 2 years. They're in no real danger up here, and perhaps that might help explain why they may not have made more of an effort to get out of here. I think they've probably run through some possibilities, and maybe their encounters with the Art Dragons have kind of like broken them and kind of broken their spirits, meaning that they've kind of almost accepted their fate, almost accepted their lot, I suppose. And that their best chance to get out of here is just to wait and see if someone else suffers the same fate as them and gets pulled through the Iron Gate and ends up here, and that their ship might be in a decent enough state to transport them off. And I think that is a fairly pessimistic position to be in. And like, these are peacekeepers. These are good people. Their job is to help people who are in desperate, kind of dreadful situations. So it probably takes an awful lot to grind them down into this kind of passive, reactive mode. But here we are. So knowing this, I think it is fair to assume that the watchtowers, the Stone Guardians, these big giant lizards, are not the only structures in this civilization. So what's up here? What is up beyond the Guardians in this mountain pass? Now, I think that there needs to be more than sufficient resources to sustain the peacekeepers for 2 years. So I think that what this place actually is a remote outpost, like a refugio, and the Stone Guardians are the watchtowers of the refugio. And I think that the main part of this outpost is a large stone building that has been kind of built into the mountain itself. And I think this refugio is big enough for both everyone to stay in, and it also must have some way of growing food. Like, we know that they've been up here for a couple of years, so they must have a way of getting food or growing food. And I think that, yeah, they must have some kind of indoor nursery type thing, or like a farm set up that's going to allow them to eat. So there's that. And I think that there's got to be clean running water up here. There's a good source of water up here in the mountains. And if that kind of central heating setup in the watchtower is anything to go by, I think that maybe there's like a steam-powered vibe to this place. It uses the kind of steady water source to power everything. It's basic, but it works, and it has sustained the peacekeepers well enough. But they are very much just surviving up here. It's not living. And I suppose the other question I want to ask is, where does the pass lead to? And I think that the pass, this is probably the kind of the entrance to this kind of pass that runs the entire length of this mountain range. But I think that it goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles. It is a huge, huge expanse of rock that stretches across this planet's surface. So we've got a refugio in the mountains that's powered by steam with 2 giant stone watchtowers in the shape of big lizards. There is a steady, sustainable supply of food and water, and 12 people who crashed on this planet 2.5 years ago have been living up here comfortably. So I'd like to add a little more detail before we put it all together. So let's ask the Oracle and see if they can throw up a prompt for us. Okay. 34 is diverse. Diverse. What does diverse mean in this context? More wildlife, perhaps? I think that's what it means. There's more kind of diverse life up here. But it can't be dangerous life, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to live up here so comfortably. So maybe something that actually helped them live up here, possibly. So we can maybe assume that those mountain streams that they get their water from might have a decent supply of fish or crustacea that they can live off. And maybe the water is so nutrient rich that there's a kind of steady supply of, I don't know, mountain kelp. That's what I'm going to call it. Kind of like some kind of organic matter, greens that they can kind of eat, that they can kind of harvest. In fact, I'm starting to feel like this place sounds awesome. And I think that maybe Archers just move in and stay here forever. But I think that if we're going to say that the life up there is diverse, it can't just be mountain kelp and some fish. I think that there has to be some more creatures up here. And maybe creatures that they can kind of live alongside and that maybe have helped out the survivors in some way. So what about some kind of livestock type creature, like grazers? We established in the last episode that the survivors were wearing animal furs, so maybe something hairy, like a kind of big yak, a big mountain space yak. I think that sounds right, but we can't just leave it at that. We'll roll up a couple of little features for this mountain space yak to make it a little bit more interesting, set it apart from your standard yak. So what other features will it have? 31 is distinct sound, okay. And 71 is mineral or metallic. Okay, fine. We'll come back to that when we envision it. But yes, we have distinctive sound and mineral or metallic. So I think maybe we need one more creature up here. But I kind of don't want to keep rolling on the oracles for these descriptors, because even though I've only rolled up a few creatures in this game so far, I do have to keep re-rolling because I do keep landing on some of the same results, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the NPC section of the rulebook and see if I can find a creature in there that might be appropriate, instead of kind of rolling these up. So give me a sec. Okay, so it's not from the NPC section per se, but you've got to agree that something like this is cool, right? It's killer art by Joshua Meehan again. And I think that what we can say is maybe this civilization that built the Stone Guardians clearly had some kind of relationship with reptiles. And maybe they rode these about the place. Maybe they ate their eggs. Maybe these things aren't dangerous or hostile. And to a degree, maybe the civilization that used to live here domesticated them and kind of eons ago, use them as transport or something like that. And since they've left this place, or since they've died out, these people who founded this civilization, these creatures have just been hanging about up here in the mountains, kind of living off the vegetation and, just vibing, just generally vibing up here like lizards. So yeah, I think that there's some of these things running around as well, and they're having a good time. So let's envision this. Let's put this all together. So Archer steps out of the Stone Guardian via the exit door that's in its hind legs. And there's this biting, bracing mountain wind that hits him immediately and kind of makes him shrug the heavy furs that he's been given over his shoulders to keep him warm. And he's instantly greeted by these two large, hulking beasts with shaggy, brown, black fur that very closely matches what he's wearing. And at their haunches, they stand as tall as Archer easily, and easily as wide. Their heads are large, with short, stubby horns, and their skulls, seem to be almost crystallized with this dark black onyx-like mineral. And they're kind of chewing the pale grass that grows in these small patches amongst the rocks, and they look at Archer with this stony indifference before one of them raises its head and lets out a deep, guttural honk. And it causes the other beast alongside it to join in. And then eventually there is a honking chorus. And behind these honking beasts, a series of long, snake-like necks rise. And these crested, reptilian creatures are suddenly staring at Archer too. And he takes a step back in apprehension before a figure steps out of the swirling, snowy wind and reaches up a hand to pat the lizard creature on the side of the head. And the creature responds appreciatively, and the figure kind of waves for Archer to join them. And he does, cautiously passing these great beasts and the slender, ostrich-like reptiles as he crosses a small clearing that's between the stone guardians. The figure he's following is heavily wrapped up against the elements. They beckon Archer on to follow them, and he does, moving away from the guardians and leaving the valley below behind him. The figure leads Archer round the back of the second guardian, where there is a large, long building that has been built into the mountainside. And it's kind of hard to make out at first, but there's this low grey building, and it's distinguishable mainly by the small, heavy-looking metal door. A door that now Archer is being led through. And he enters a large room, the warmth of which has him immediately shaking off his layers, all these furs. And it's a cavernous space that is about 50 meters square, with high ceilings supported by huge wooden beams. To Archer's left, there is a living quarters, which is denoted by kind of lots and lots of rows of bunks that have been carved into the stone walls. And to his right is a series of lamps and pipes and vats that are all connected to this large, round metal boiler that takes up one whole corner of this space. And the lamps are hanging over this large, flat bed of leafy green foliage, this lush nursery of vegetation on which Cole's crew have been surviving. And the walls are covered with carved relief artwork. The civilization who built this place left their culture, they left their stories in stone on the wall. In the center of this room stands Cole Petrov, whose crew are gathered around him. On the floor in front of them are 3 large travel cases. Archer wanted to know what had been salvaged from the Rockhopper, and this appears to be the extent of it. The faces look at Archer with a mixture of hope and desperation, and he suddenly feels something like pressure, something like a weight of expectation upon him. These people were hoping for a ship to come and for a ride out of here. What they got was a man who fell from the sky, who is standing before them, about to pitch a crazy, crazy idea. So the crew throw open these cases. And what's inside? And as much as I think I'd love a jetpack in this situation, I'd love a jetpack. It would be very nice. We've got to be sensible about this. And I think what we can do is work out what's in there and what we can do about it from figuring out what our goal is. Now, our ultimate goal is to get off the planet, but the short-term goal is to get Archer near enough to the gate so he can activate it. But then what? In all honesty, I do not know. So I don't think Archer knows. And I think that there will be a moment that if he manages to get up there somehow, if we manage to fashion something to launch him into the sky, to get him close enough to the gate, to get him to activate it, there's going to be a moment of hesitation where he could just go through the gate by himself and leave these people here. Maybe that's something he might have to pitch to these people. He might have to pitch the idea that he will be back for them. Essentially, I feel like he's learning the ropes of this network. He's learning how to navigate these gates. He is maybe working out the fact that once he goes through one and comes out of one exit, that kind of stays with him and he can come back again, possibly. That's what he's hoping for, maybe. Maybe he can get back to Sepulchre. Maybe he can get back to Luna. Maybe he can get to the Eclipse. Maybe they can find another gate somewhere else. Maybe they can come back here at some point and get these people to rescue them. Is that not a terrible idea? Is that a better idea than what these people already have? Which is nothing. Currently they are just waiting, and he's offering them a chance to at least turn on the gate so it could work and get them off, even if he's got no exact way of getting them up and out altogether. But anyway, we need to cross that bridge when we come to it. First of all, we need to see what's in these crates, what's in the supplies, what did they salvage from the rock hopper, and can any of it be used to launch Archer into the sky and get him up to the gate so he can activate it. So what's inside these cases? What do these people have as far as equipment goes? What did they manage to salvage from the rock hopper? So what we are looking for, essentially, amongst all these salvage bits and pieces, is something that can get us airborne, that would also be, in a narrative sense, realistic for the crew to have not only had on their ship, but realistically something they would still have. And Cole said that they've got no power. So I think that whilst this little settlement obviously does have power, it's a very different type of power. This is like a kind of a steam / hydroelectric power. There's not like outlets in the wall they can just plug stuff in to charge. So what is going to be realistic that they would have that we could use? Now, I was thinking, what about something like a couple of short-range reconnaissance drones? Like little survey drones that when they first got here they used, because they were kind of still charged, they still had power in them, and they used them to kind of like survey the local area. But as they've been here for this amount of time, they've slowly run out of juice and have been just sat here not being used. And you know, they're good size drones. Two of them in some way kind of harnessed together could easily lift Archer into the sky. And I think that's what we're going to say we've got. And that is the plan. If we can get these charged somehow, then perhaps we could rig them together to get Archer airborne and get him into a position where he can activate the gate. And if he manages to do that, and if he manages to return safely, maybe, could they take it in turns to go up there on the drone and jump through the gate? Is that a bad idea? Yes, it is. It is a terrible idea, but it is an idea. And an idea that theoretically works. And that is better than staying here and living out the rest of your lives in a stone refugio with ostrich lizards and crystal-headed yaks. So that is, I think, what we're going to go for. So I don't want to make this straightforward, and we are playing a game after all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to incorporate a move into this. And I'm going to incorporate a move to narratively make it so it's not 100% straightforward. And we're going to make the move, check your gear. Because Archer needs to bring something to this party. They just can't have everything that they need to get these drones in working order. That would be too much. They've got working batteries and the drones work, but they're dead. There's no charge, there's nothing. Now, Archer knows that his plan is to harness somehow the power of these almighty art dragons, these giant electric lizards, into the batteries somehow. But what we need is some kind of device, some kind of like plot MacGuffin, some kind of doohickey, some kind of little thing that Archer might have that might help that process, might be able to convert the power, maybe transform it or something from this kind of immense electrical discharge into this kind of focused battery charge. And I think Archer knows that he's definitely got something in his bag that might be able to do it, like a little gadget, little power modulator, something like that. So maybe it's something that whilst out in the field he uses to do kind of emergency repairs on Griff, or to keep, Griff topped up with charge or whatever. I don't know whatever it is. Technically, it doesn't matter. It just needs to be a device that he's looking for. So let's have a look at the move. Check your gear. It says, when you check to see if you have a specific helpful item or resource, roll plus supply. But I hear you say, your supply is only 2. That is correct. Well, thanks to our upgraded scavenger asset, we have an ability which says that we can roll plus wits or supply, whichever is highest, when we check our gear. And in this case, our wits are definitely higher than our supply, because Archer, and this is what this kind of this asset mechanically reflects, is how resourceful Archer is when the chips are down and he doesn't have many resources to hand. So what we're going to do is going to check our gear for this gadget. So let's make the move, rolling plus wits. That's a weak hit, and our momentum won't help us, but that's kind of okay, because we might need that momentum later when we do something really stupid. So, and speaking of momentum, our upgraded scavenger asset says that we take +1 momentum on a hit, so we're up to 8 momentum. But it was a weak hit, so whilst we found our gadget, that is going to cost us. So let's look at the move. On a weak hit, you have it, but must choose one. Either your supplies diminish, sacrifice resources, or it's not quite right and causes a complication or delay, lose momentum. Now, we've just boosted our momentum. I don't really want to lose any. So what we're going to do is we're going to sacrifice resources and knock our supply down to 1. And I think I'm going to reflect that by saying that whilst we are rooting around in Archer's satchel, he finds the thing. He's relieved to kind of find it undamaged. But I think we're going to account for the drop in supply by saying that now he's taken the time to have a proper look, maybe kind of tip everything out and have a proper inspect of the condition that his gear is in. It's worse than he thought after the Arc Dragon attack. And what he had saved, what he kind of pushed back into his bag from the wreckage of the rock hopper, is actually mostly damaged or unusable, and he's really scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as supplies are concerned. So this is really it, and we'll take our supply down to 1. So we've got our gadget, and that is going to allow us to get power from the Arc Dragon and somehow magically convert it into juice for these batteries, for these kind of energy cells. Now we have the not insignificant challenge of getting the power out of the Arc Dragon. So that's the next difficult part of this plan. And the plan is going to be what we need, because we can't just go up and tap it on the shoulder and ask it politely. So what we're going to do is we're going to make another move. And I feel like when you're making a plan, the move secure an advantage is the most appropriate. Secure an advantage says when you assess a situation, make preparations or attempt to gain leverage, envision your action and roll plus whatever. So what we're going to do is, I think, the best way we're going to do this is Archer is going to set a trap. And here is how I think it's going to go down. It's nighttime. And Archer and Cole Petrov are lying on their elbows in the pouring rain. They're partially sheltered by the tree line in which they're taking cover, but the rain is coming down hard, as it does every night, and they are cold, wet, and miserable. They are down in the valley at night time, which puts them in what must be the most dangerous place on this entire planet at the most dangerous time of day. And they are here because of Archer's plan. A plan that needs power. And the only source of power on this entire planet is lurking somewhere out here in the dark. Archer grips a rope in his hands. Cole raises his night scope to his eye and looks out across the grassy plain. Some 50 or so meters away, at the end of the rope, is an empty shell. A shell that once belonged to an armadillo rat crab, the creatures that are ubiquitous out here amongst the grass. But tonight, they seem to know better, and the only shell out here is the one at the end of the rope. An empty shell, save for batteries, fitted into a shockproof racking inside and connected to Archer's power regulator. On the outside of the shell, 6 metal conductor rods stick out. The thinking is, if they can get the Arc Dragon to zap this thing, they can capture some of that power. They are literally attempting to catch lightning in a bottle, and they're attempting to do so by fishing for a giant killer electric lizard with an empty shell at the end of a piece of rope. Cole lowers the scope and turns to Archer and says, "I can't believe that no one had a better idea than this." And Archer says, "I'll take that as a compliment." So, is this that bad of an idea? Yes it is. But how solid is the trap? How likely is this to work? To find out, we're going to make that move. We're going to make the secure and advantage move. And we are doing so using trickery, because we are just trying to dupe a giant lizard into taking bait. So we'll be rolling plus shadow. Yeah, a weak hit feels about right. It really does feel about right for the kind of the level of stupid in this plan. But it's good enough to be feasible. Bad enough to end in disaster, but good enough to be feasible. So, on a weak hit, we can either take +2 momentum or +1 on our next move. And as tempting as it is to max our momentum out, we still have got some dangerous things to do after this very dangerous thing. So what I'm going to say is we're going to forego that and take the +1 on our next move. So, Archer and Cole wait, watching for movement in the gloom, for that telltale flash of lightning in the distance. Now, they have seen some flashes, but they are far, far away. There's nothing close. There's nothing out here on the plains. But it just has to be a matter of time. And as Archer waits, he thinks about Luna. He thinks about how he'd feel infinitely more sure that this would work if it was her beside him. He has struggled to rationalize their chemistry their entire time together. There's no logic to it, and he knows that. Somehow, they just work together. He is calculating and logical. She is reckless, impetuous, and hot-headed. And this, right here, this is exactly the type of plan that she would approve of. And that forces a smile to cross Archer's face and strengthens his resolve. And Archer is shaken from that thought by Cole, who tugs at his sleeve, motioning somewhere off into the distance. He offers the scope, but Archer doesn't need it to see an Arc Dragon emerge from the tree line opposite. Its head close to the ground, searching, sniffing for a scent. Archer's grip on the rope tightens, and he begins to slowly pull. So this needs to be a move, I feel. And it feels dangerous. It feels really dangerous. So it's going to be a face danger, I believe. And it's definitely going to be using trickery or deception. So we'll be, again, rolling plus shadow. And we do get that +1 from the secure and advantage move as we laid this trap out. So let's roll some dice and see if this big old dumb lizard goes for it. That's another weak hit. Another weak hit. Should I burn my momentum and make this into a strong hit? Should I? Is it critical that this needs to be a strong hit here? Is it essential? I don't actually think it is. I don't think it's essential that we make this a strong hit. I think we could roll with a weak hit just this once, because we really do need turning on the gate to work. So I think we spare the momentum in this instance and we take a suffer move. So we'll envision this first and then we'll deal with the mechanics later. So Archer starts to pull the rope, and off in the long grass, the shell begins to move towards them. He knows he doesn't have long to get the Arc Dragon's attention, because ultimately he's just pulling the bait straight towards their location. That part of the plan is not that well thought through, I have to say. He pulls quicker, hoping that'll bait the beast forward. Cole kind of puts his hand out, motions for Archer to pause. Out in the dark, the giant, ominous form of the Arc Dragon begins to break from the trees, stooping cautiously, approaching the area where the trap has been set. Archer yanks on the rope hard, bringing the shell lurching forward a few meters. And now that gets the dragon's attention, and it lumbers forwards, making up half the distance in a few four-legged bounds. Archer pulls again, and the beast begins to circle the shell. And Archer pulls again, but Cole once again stops him, aware that the beast might see the rope and follow the rope to where they are. The Arc Dragon slowly approaches, its huge head bowed. It brings its snout in closer, sniffing the air around it. It's cautious, and right now it's not going for it. So Archer gets to his knees, and pushing back with his feet in the sludge and the mud, he falls backwards and yanks the rope with him, sending the shell skipping forward quickly through the grass. And that does it. The Arc Dragon rears up on its hind legs. Its shimmering scales begin to crackle and pop with white and blue, and there's this split second of still and silence before the air crackles with static, and the great beast slams down into the ground, dispersing ragged bolts of lightning in all directions, sending this booming shockwave through the floor. A shockwave that Archer can feel in his bones. The shell is pinged into the air, wreathed in static. And Archer and Cole watch as the Arc Dragon moves in, sniffing the upturned shell, nudging it around with its snout, kind of frantically searching around for the kill. But there's nothing to eat inside. And the monstrous creature rears up and lets out that blood-curdling roar once again, before shaking its great, hulking mass, sparks and residual energy emanating from it, before the gloom once again descends as it heads back into the trees opposite. And Archer and Cole watch and wait in complete silence, total stillness, both holding their breath. Archer still holding the rope. And after a minute, he slowly starts to pull, dragging the shell towards them. And as it reaches them, they can see the damage that's been done. The shell is blackened and the rope is charred. It's kind of barely holding together. The conductor rods have been totally scorched. And they flip the thing over to find the racking inside bowed and burnt, but the batteries, those energy cells that are held in place, are thankfully intact. And Cole uses his sleeve to wipe some mud away from these long kind of cylindrical cells to check them. And after a second, a pale green blinking light illuminates his smiling face, telling Archer that this plan somehow worked. They have power. They have harnessed the energy from this giant monster, and now they can charge the drones. Now they have a shot at survival. But this was a weak hit. We rolled a weak hit, so we have to make a suffer move. And I don't feel like Archer is in any physical danger at this point. I think it was very stressful and frightening to watch that happen, but I think that what's most narratively appropriate is that we take a hit to the supply again, because what I'm going to say is that whilst we managed to pull this off, we managed to get the energy cells charged, Archer's gadget, his trusty little handheld power converter thing, got absolutely torched in this attack, and it is just a kind of a pile of melted plastic and wires. So we're going to go down to 0 supply, and as such, we have to mark a condition on our sheet, and that condition is that we are now unprepared. I think this is the first time we've marked a condition. I know that we've been down to 0 health, but I think we managed to kind of get around that somehow by not being wounded. But we are now unprepared, and that means that if we actually find ourselves at any point having to sacrifice resources and we are still unprepared, that we have to pay for it in a very different way, and it's not great. So if and when we get out of this mess, we need to address our supply issue pretty urgently. So, still staring at this blinking green battery, Cole says, "It worked. I can't believe it worked." And then there is a distant roar from somewhere in the darkness. And Archer says, "That's great, but it's time to go." And the two men quickly work their way back through the trees, back through the woods, and out across the rocks and the shale, then up the endless switchbacks, through the mountain, up into the cold, and up to the safety of the Stone Guardians. And I think that what we're going to do here, rather than kind of describe their triumphant return and their preparations for the next part of this plan, I'm just going to cut to the chase, right? And I know that I'm compounding climaxes here, and I'm throwing all accepted story conventions out of the window by congesting the end of this episode, but I feel like we're on a roll, and let's face it, last week we had an episode which was pretty low on action, so let's go for it. Let's stack this episode with action, and we are just going to cut to the chase. We are going to cut to next morning and cut to Archer rigged up and ready to go. But what kind of rig are we thinking here? Like, is he being hauled into the air on ropes? Or are the drones being tethered together and Archer strapped into it like it's a hang glider? Or is it like a floating platform that he's going to stand on? Which sounds ridiculous, but he kind of needs his hands free and he needs to be kind of unencumbered. So yeah, I think it's going to be something more like a floating platform rather than the other two options. So let's take a minute to think, what does that look like? Well, there's two drones, and they're fairly high tech because these peacekeepers are from the Terminus, aren't they? Where I imagine things look a little newer, a little less kind of cobbled together than what Archer is used to seeing in the Outlands. And these drones are top of the range. They are smooth. They're kind of oval shaped. And there's a single powerful rotor blade at each of their centers. And there are these smooth black glassy domes on each side. They're like powerful long-range scanners, cameras, sensors. These things are top of the range, and thanks to Archer, now fully operational. So each drone has been secured to either end of a narrow metal gangplank that is just wide enough for Archer to comfortably sit on and slightly less comfortably stand on. It's a basic setup, but it's going to do the job. It's going to get him up there. And the drones can only carry so much weight, right? So as a result, Archer is removing everything from his person that could possibly help. His pistol and its holster, his jacket, and even his boots. The lighter he is, the less hard the drones have to work to keep him up in the air. And the less hard they have to work, the less power they're going to use, and the more trips they can make. They probably aren't going to be able to get any more power again, so this is really it. So Archer sits on the gangplank and he clips himself into like a harness that's been rigged that kind of goes over his shoulder, because if he falls, he'll at least be able to be brought down safely rather than plummeting to the ground again. And I'd say the drones are like remote operated. They're operated by like a small control pad that one of the survivors is using. And after the last few checks, the survivor with the pad nods in Cole's direction. Ready to launch, ready to go. And Cole moves over to Archer, who is again double-checking his harness for safety. And Cole says, "Are you ready?" And Archer nods. looking anything but ready. And Cole says to the others, "Let's get him up." And he gives the signal, and suddenly Archer feels the rig come to life beneath him, slowly lifting him off the ground, and grips onto the gangplank as it begins to rise up and away from the mountains and up towards the huge black iron gate hanging in this planet's atmosphere. So before we describe this, we need to make a move, right? And that move very much feels like it's face danger, right? But what's it face danger plus? I think it's either plus edge or plus wits, because we kind of need expertise and focus to open the gate, so that would be wits. But it's going to take a measure of agility to stay on this flying surfboard. And that feels like the more dangerous part of this act of opening the gate. So what I'm going to say is, it is going to be rolling plus edge, because this is the most dangerous aspect of the whole thing. So let's do it. Let's face some danger. We're going to be rolling plus edge. And remember, we have a fair chunk of momentum to burn should this go wrong. If it really goes wrong, like we roll 9s or 10s, then we are boned. But we do have some measure of protection from the momentum that we have accrued so far. So let's do this. Let's face danger, rolling plus edge. Holy moly. We're not going to need that momentum, because not only is this a strong hit, it's a strong hit with a match, which means that not only does this part of this very stupid plan actually work, we are actually going to get an additional boon from the match that we've rolled. So what that is, we'll figure out in a bit, but first, let's get the mechanics out of the way. On a strong hit, you are successful, take +1 momentum, so we're up to 9 now. Okay, right, let's envision this. Archer looks back down to the mountains, and after a few moments, the watching crew fade from his view as he gains altitude. And thankfully, it's a clear morning, and there's little in the way of wind or any other conditions that would make this more difficult, would make it more treacherous. That said, he is essentially just strapped to a plank, held up by a couple of fans, so he keeps gripping on tight. And he is being piloted away from the mountains and back towards the valley. After a few minutes, he sees the vast forest below him. And the last time he saw them, from this angle, he was plummeting towards them at great speed. And not wanting to repeat that, he double checks that harness once again. The iron gate slowly nears. It is so vast, so large, and what ancient force keeps it suspended up here, Archer can't even guess. But it's there, and it represents a way off this planet. It represents a way back to Luna. And he doesn't know if he can activate it the way he did the other two. This is larger, this is much larger, but it has to work the same way, it just has to. And I'd say the platform gets within 20 meters of the gate, and he gives a hand signal for the operator to bring it to a stop. And the platform hovers in place. This is close enough. This is where he needs to be. Archer once again checks his harness and gets slowly to his feet, gingerly balancing on the gangplank, which feels much narrower all of a sudden. There wasn't any wind before, but it now seems to be whipping around him. He steadies himself, holding his hands out to balance. And the gate dwarfs him, this giant structure, quiet and still. He takes this deep breath and tries to focus. He holds his right hand out in front of him and starts to trace the shape, the circles within circles, the symbol that activates these things. But nothing happens. He does it again. Still nothing. Again, nothing. And that's when he starts to panic. And he furiously starts repeating the sequence over and over, but still nothing happens. And then he's about to raise his hand, and he's somewhere else. He's no longer stood up in the sky. He's in a familiar, rocky desert, stood before the glassy, black spire. There's a stillness here, a quiet, a silence. But it is suddenly shattered by a piercing scream and the sensation of being held, of someone gripping his wrist. He looks down and there's a hand with ragged strips of black iron protruding from the flesh. Before he can see the owner of the hand's face, he is back in the sky, back on the platform, looking down at his hand. And his hand is glowing with a white light. He raises his hand once again and traces the shape slowly, the light forming the circles and the cross. And it stays there. It stays there after he stops. And then suddenly there is a low hum, a familiar resonance, a familiar frequency as the gate comes to life. White light illuminates every part of this giant black iron circle. The hum gets louder, and then a low boom pushes the floating rig back and away. This thing is on, and Archer just knows, he just feels that this place, this gate, is now connected to the network. He steadies himself once again, and he holds in position to see if it fades or if it goes off again, but it doesn't. It is on. And his hand grips the release of the harness. He could unclip now and step forward. And he just knows, and he doesn't know how he knows, but he just knows that if he takes a step forward from here, if he takes a leap of faith, he will be pulled through the gate. And he also knows that he can get back to Sepulchre. He feels like he can navigate anywhere else, but he has also this feeling. He has this feeling that he knows the way back to the gate he left through. He just knows it. Because he's now part of that network. A living map being slowly sketched in. So he knows that if he just steps off this platform, he can return to Sepulchre, to Luna, to the Eclipse, to Griff, to the Conduit. If they're still there, he can get to them. And he starts to toy with the release of the harness. He starts to loosen it. But then he stops himself. He thinks back to those 12 people down in the mountains. 12 stranded, desperate people who are relying on him to get them off this planet. He is their only hope, and that is what stays his hand. He turns, and even though he now can't see them anymore, he makes the signal to come down again, leaving the now active, glowing gate behind him. So let's take Archer back down to the mountains. But first, we need to resolve that match, the match that we rolled. What do we want to do with this? I think I want to kind of throw something random into the mix, because I feel like that's when this game is the most fun. But what random element are we going to throw in here? What form is this roll going to take? And I've been looking at it, and I think what I'm going to do is roll on the planet side opportunity oracle, because we don't really have any other resources. All we have is this planet, right? And I'm thinking that maybe from up here, from this vantage point, Archer might be able to notice something else about the geography of this place, something that they've not discovered yet, or maybe we can see something else that this ancient civilization might have left behind that might help us or something. I don't know. What we're going to do is just roll and play to find out. So let's ask the oracle. 11 is interesting or helpful aspect of benign life forms. That's interesting. Okay. I think I've got something for this. But first, let's describe what's happening. So, Archer slowly returns safely to the mountain pass, and he is welcomed back by Cole and his crew, who all of a sudden have faces full of hope and full of optimism. The drones touch down, and Archer unfastens the harness, stepping off the gangplank and back onto solid stone, which feels very welcome beneath his feet. Cole runs up to him. He's kind of patting him on the back and congratulating him, and they both look up at the gate, which is glowing white like this giant halo in the sky. And Cole says, "What now? What do we do now?" And Archer is about to answer that question before something catches his eye. Just off behind the survivors, the sun is still coming up behind the mountains, and it backlights the stone guardians beautifully, outlining their majestic grey stone forms with a warm, soft orange light. But something is moving on top of one of them, and Archer kind of shields his eyes against the sun to try and make it out. And it's not one, it's not two, but three of those ostrich lizard creatures, and they're kind of pecking around. And Archer looks at them quizzically and watches as one, then the other, lets out a shrill morning call and shakes out a pair of brightly feathered wings. And Archer tilts his head, the cogs turning in his brain. And Cole sees him looking at the creatures, sees Archer thinking, and then he looks up at the glowing iron gate in the sky, and he puts it together and says, "Oh no." Thank you a million times. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe if you've not done so already, and click the little bell icon so you can be notified as soon as the next video drops. I'll be back next week, but until then, it's farewell and safe passage.